Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Today is Tuesday, June 25th, and we have another crowning of a national champion with the Florida Panthers after what seemed like it was going to be a historic collapse, had an incredible rebuttal to losing 3 straight games and won Game 7 at home to bring home the franchise's first ever Stanley Cup championship. So we're going to be diving into Game 7, look at the series as a whole, and additionally we're going to touch on as well the fact that Connor McDavid won the Conn Smythe trophy and whether or not that should have been the case, considering that he was just the 6th player in NHL history to ever win the trophy while on a losing team in the playoffs. So we'll be diving into that debate as well. And then as the show goes on, we're going to talk some NBA as well. We are just one day away from the NBA draft, so I'm going to be giving my top 10 prospects in this upcoming class. Then we will also be touching on the Toronto Raptors, giving a 5-year extension to Scotty Barnes, and some updates on the Lakers offseason as well. They just brought in JJ Redick, officially named him the head coach, and sort of their thought process right now regarding LeBron James and his future. But before we dive into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section and give us your thoughts on all of the latest happenings in sports as we try and make this show as interactive as possible. And if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. If you leave a tip or donation with a comment, your comments will pop up on the screen for everybody to see. Anything would be greatly appreciated on that front. The Florida Panthers were just on the brink of becoming, a laughingstock to the sports community for years to come, as they had a 3-0 series lead in the Stanley Cup Finals and almost let it slip away. But last night was an incredible performance from them in my eyes. I know that a lot of people are sort of putting this on the Oilers for their lack of execution, but the Panthers, in my eyes, were the best team headed into the playoffs, and they continued to show why as they got back to their identity a little bit more, ramping up the aggression once again, that forecheck that has been so prolific for them for a number of months here. You can even go back to last year as well, and they sort of leaned on that to be able to pull this one out. And now the Panthers are NHL champions for the first time in the franchise's history. So in order for the Panthers to sort of redirect the momentum of this series, whether or not you believe in momentum in playoff series like these, you knew they were going to need to get production from their top goal scorers, and that's what they got with both Carter Verhaeghe and Sam Reinhart, who were able to step up in big moments to put the Panthers ahead. The Verhaeghe goal came as the first in the game in that first period, where he was able to put in a really nice redirection off of an Evan Rodriguez shot, and Rodriguez, that was really his only super notable, I would say, moment of the game. But Rodriguez was incredible throughout this entire series, and I think that he deserves a lot of credit for this, although it's going to, fall a little bit lower on the totem pole in terms of where credit is due for the Panthers to win this series. But again, they had sort of just fallen out of their game. From a physicality standpoint, they weren't able to put bodies on the other teams, disrupt Edmonton quite as much as they were in the first few games, and that was clearly a point of emphasis for Paul Maurice and his team. But again, also, it's about big players stepping up in the key moments, and Verhaeghe and Reinhart, who had both gone scoreless since Game 3 of this series, were both able to come up in massive moments for them and it made all the difference. Like I mentioned, Verhaeghe goal sort of started it off right, and then Reinhart in the second period was able to score what went on to be the game winner in that second period, where he was coming down the ice in transition. You saw the Oilers sort of collapse back towards the net, and Sam Reinhart, it was a little reminiscent for me of the overtime goal he had in what I believe was game 5 or game 4 of the Rangers series, where he had the overtime winner, and he was just able to sort of comfortably get into his spot and just let it rip. This is somebody who scored 57 goals in the regular season, and we know how prolific of a scorer he is when he gets his opportunities, and that was all the space that he needed to get this one to go. Just got it under Stuart Skinner's goal. Give Carter Verhaeghe some credit as well. I believe he was the one who was screening Skinner on that play as well. So the two of them were just absolutely massive for them. But of course, none of this Panthers run is really able to take place if it wasn't for the play of Sergei Bobrovsky, who now at 35 years old, the two-time Vezina trophy winner, is a world champion. So you have to feel good for Sergei Bobrovsky, who it felt like to some degree, and we're going to get into the debate in terms of the Conn Smythe, he sort of fumbled that away with some poor performances in games 4, 5, and 6. But in this game, he did absolutely everything he needed to find his groove once again. And again, the job that he did throughout the entirety of this postseason cannot go without recognition. And now Bobrovsky, who, is coming into the final years likely of his career, is able to have this shining moment where, again, the Panthers are absolutely not in this position without him. So you have to give him a ton of credit. But as much credit as he deserves, I think that this was also in large part about the fact that this Florida Panthers defense is one of the best units that we've seen in the NHL for a couple years now. In this game, 17 blocked shots, 32 hits. Like I mentioned, they sort of found their way into refining their identity of, we are going to fly around this ice, we're going to make things extremely difficult for you to set up, and we're going to try and take you out of your zone. And they were absolutely tested, where there were a number of instances in both the second period and the third period where they were sort of, I wouldn't quite say reeling necessarily, but there were a number of instances where we see how good the puck movement is for the Oilers in this offense that they have, that there were a number of times where they were running a minute plus into the time of possession in the offensive zone and had the Florida defense on their heels a little bit, but they never backed off, and they were able to shut down all of those types of opportunities. In the third period, there were a couple of different instances where we saw around the 7-minute mark, Sergei Bobrovsky was down on the ice, and McDavid had the puck at the goal line. It seemed like it was going to be a golden opportunity for him to put the puck in the net, but he couldn't get a shot off. He dumps it off to Hyman, and then Bobrovsky dives out there. Tons of bodies crashing back as well to sort of help put pressure on Edmonton as their goalie was in a compromising situation. And then with about 4 minutes left, Bobrovsky again, he ends up getting knocked over on the play, and he had lost his stick too. He's diving everywhere trying to recover, but never really seemed in control of that moment. But it didn't matter because of the fact that the Florida defense was just everywhere, swarming the Oilers on that possession, and they never even got a shot on net there. And there was an incredible Eetu Luostarinen blocked shot in there as well. So I think that their defense deserves just as much credit as Bobrovsky. Again, this was a very complete Panthers team in my eyes, and they are definitely deserving of this. And, even when you look at Reinhart's goal, it came off of a defensive stop at that point late in the second period. It was turning into a little bit of a track meet, just both teams skating up and down the ice, and it was the job of, it might have been Kulikov, I think, that sort of swiped the puck away when Bobrovsky had come out of the net a little bit more, and then that ultimately started the break down the ice that got Reinhart the look on the breakaway. So, I just think that this Panthers team was so resilient to have their backs up against the wall. And obviously, it's one thing for whatever it's worth of, losing out on a championship, but they would have become the laughingstock of the entire sports world to some degree, for years from now because of blowing a 3-0 lead in the finals. But instead, they come out victorious, and you have to feel great for head coach Paul Maurice, where he has had quite a lengthy career as a head coach in the NFL. He got his first gig in 1995. He has seen lots of ups and downs throughout his career. Actually, the most losses from any coach in NHL history. Has been fired 3 times, and it just seemed like it was this full circle moment for him, where my favorite moment of the night was when he was able to first get his hands on the cup, and he lifts it up, and it looked like he just took a second, sort of closed his eyes, took the moment in, and then just exploded with a couple swears in there and was just celebrating, and it was really awesome to see. So you have to feel good about it from that perspective. I am a Bruins fan, and I openly said I'm rooting for the Oilers in this, but I don't know, there is something to be said for, I felt good for the Panthers, the fact that they were able to avoid this catastrophe, and they did so by playing some of the hardest hockey that we have seen in the postseason. I thought it was just very indicative of the type of team that this is. They understood all the battle scars, even going back to last year's Stanley Cup Finals, and they deserve this to come away with it. I believe the best team in the NHL was rightly crowned this year. So very briefly here on the Oilers, it's tough. Again, a lot of people are sort of saying that this was a missed opportunity for them. I would prefer to look at it from the Panthers' perspective of they absolutely earned this one. But it was, some interesting decisions along the way. I think one of the biggest things that they're getting questioned for this morning is Knobloch's decision to play that first line really heavy minutes during the third period, because by the time that, and obviously you understand, you have nothing else to lose necessarily, you're already in game 7, there is no tomorrow, it's all or nothing. But I feel like by the end of it, you could see the Oilers went to pull Stuart Skinner out of goal with like a minute and a half, 2 minutes left, and by that point all of Edmonton's skaters were just so gassed, and you could see they never really got a solid handle in the zone during that time with the man advantage. Connor McDavid is falling down at mid-ice trying to just leave it all out there, but it was just too much by that point. McDavid, like I mentioned, extremely heavy minutes in this one, played the, over half of the third period. So I think that ultimately, this is, to some degree, I feel like the majority of America was probably rooting, and of course all of Canada was rooting for the Oilers in this to pull off history. But again, I don't think that by any means this is the wrong team came out on top. And, again, biases aside and everything, I feel like this ultimately ended up as one of the almost perfect results, really, with the best team winning the cup and the best player in the league getting recognized on a national stage as Connor McDavid won the Conn Smythe trophy, which does not happen very often, of course, coming to a player that was on the losing side of the Stanley Cup Finals. And that's what we're going to dive into next, is the debate as to whether or not the voters got it right on that end. So we are going to dive into that debate, but first, taking a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign. side. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we continue to talk about the Stanley Cup Finals that wrapped up last night. And it had a lot of people up in arms about the debate surrounding the Conn Smythe Trophy winner, which was given to Connor McDavid, despite the fact that the Oilers ended up losing the series. So I want to dive into that next here. McDavid becomes one of 6 players in the history of the NHL to win this award while also being on a losing team in the playoffs. Only the second forward to ever do so, the last one being Reggie Leach in 1976. So again, this is a pretty unheard of feat here, especially in the modern era of the NHL. And it was definitely weird. Again, this was a situation where really after Game 5, it seemed like we were headed in this direction, that Connor McDavid had secured the Conn Smythe Trophy, and that pretty much came into fruition here, where he went scoreless in each of the last 2 games, and it still didn't matter, and he was given the trophy. But you know, again, it did feel very weird where, especially so because it was in Florida, you know, you had the boos coming out there, and it is absolutely worth having the debate as to whether or not it was justified. I think that ultimately, like I mentioned, McDavid with his multiple, I think it was 4-point outings in back-to-back games in games 4 and 5 that really secured it for him, and you know, making history there, along with the number of other individual statistics he put up over the course of this postseason, breaking Wayne Gretzky's record for the most assists ever in a single postseason. Anytime you're breaking a Gretzky record, you know you are doing something right, and that was absolutely the case with McDavid. The 4th most points all time in a single postseason, so absolutely one for the record books. Now, the reason why I think that it becomes more of an argument is the fact that he did go scoreless in games 6 and 7. And ultimately, you know, when you look at the record books and the history of award winners, the idea is that it provides sort of a story as to what took place, especially, you know, when you look at the Conn Smythe, the entirety of the postseason. McDavid had a historic run, so by no, like, absolutely he should be recognized for it, but ultimately there should be a little bit of an extra added weight to these Stanley Cup Finals games. And if McDavid had even, you know, scored a goal or had an assist or two in the final 2 games, I don't think that there would be much of an argument whatsoever. But it's the fact that, again, he was just so worn out by the end of the series that it is really interesting to see, especially on the other end where you have Bobrovsky, who absolutely struggled during those games that the Panthers ended up losing. We've talked, you know, a number of times about the stat of 12 of the first 13 games of the postseason, he allowed 2 goals or less, and then he went on to allow 3+ in 3 straight games. Was really bad timing for him in terms of this award. Now, ultimately, we're talking about an award here, or a trophy in this case, and I would have to imagine, us as fans and in the media, we care more about this than the actual players do. Connor McDavid, he didn't even come out to accept the Conn Smythe trophy. Some people had an issue with that. He hung back with his teammates, and I think that that's just what a leader would do. It's not about him. He didn't want to have this big moment for himself individually while suffering this brutal loss. So, again, I think people just like to complain more than anything. But, again, when you come back to the conversation of really, I do think it was between Sergei Bobrovsky and between Connor McDavid. Now, Alexander Barkov probably had a conversation for a lot of this series, especially, or a lot of this postseason, you could say even, especially once Bobrovsky was running into some trouble during that stretch of losing these games. But ultimately, it was really just down between these two in my eyes. And again, my ultimate, feeling on it in general is that nobody really took it from McDavid once he did win, or he did have those multiple big games in 4 and 5. That, from there, Bobrovsky had a nice closeout performance, absolutely, but he wasn't exactly lights out in Game 6 either, allowing 3 goals in that game. And again, I just think that it became McDavid's trophy to lose once Game 5 wrapped up, and nobody from the Panthers necessarily did that. And again, I understand it was the first time I've ever seen something like that of an MVP type trophy awarded to somebody losing the finals. Now, obviously, we all know that this is for the entirety of the postseason. We don't have to dive into that all that much deeper, but in general here, just seeing the fact that the Panthers are all celebrating on the ice and they come out and announce that it's somebody from the losing team that is awarded this prestigious trophy, it's weird, but at the same time, I don't think you can get all too upset about it, considering the fact that McDavid had all of these moments throughout the postseason where it was just so clear that he is the best player in hockey. And not just that, from an individual standpoint, but he led the Oilers all the way, not just to the finals, but to a Game 7, and almost did overcome, historic odds. And obviously, there's an argument that people have thrown out there in terms of, all right, but for what? Like, what did it result in? Well, it resulted in making Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals basically as close as you can get to winning, but not winning. And I understand that it is all about the cup at the end of the day, but at the same time, you can't diminish everything that McDavid did just because at the end of it they end up losing in this heartbreaking way. I just feel like I understand it's a little bit of a weird, gross feeling almost to be, sitting there watching somebody from a losing team be awarded. Again, something that I hadn't experienced before, but at the same time, I think it was totally justified. I don't have any problem with it. If Bobrovsky had been better down the stretch of this series, it would have been his award. And obviously last night it was 23 saves on 24 shots. He was great, but coming off of that stretch of really bad games, both he and McDavid had those, you could say, in parts of this series. Nobody was flawless, but if you look at the overall collection of work from both of these players, McDavid had a run for the ages in this postseason, and I think we're going to be looking at a very long stretch before anybody tops his record of, I think he finished with 42 assists, and it might have been more than that actually. He might have gotten up to 45 or so, but I don't want to speculate off the top of my head here with numbers, but there's just no denying Connor McDavid's excellence, and it wasn't his year to win, unfortunately. I think that it is definitely disappointing to see the fact that he was scoreless the last 2 games. The fact that Leon Draisaitl just never really showed up for the Oilers in this series was a huge hurt to them, considering the fact that, you know, he showed some flashes maybe in the first period of Game 6 that he was going to be able to find his footing in this series, and he just never did. So, you know, ultimately, I think that this postseason in general for the NHL was just phenomenal. It's definitely the playoffs that I've paid the most attention to in my viewing of hockey, and it was just, especially off of, you know, an NBA playoffs that was maybe a little bit underwhelming. The NHL did us justice with this one, and we got an all-time series in this. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section about the series in general, whether or not you think McDavid should have won the Conn Smythe. But we're going to be shifting gears a little bit here to the NBA, where we are just 1 day away from the NBA draft, at least the first round, as they are breaking it up into 2 days. But with that being said, I want to dive into my list of my top 10 favorite prospects in this upcoming draft. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we continue on some draft coverage, as we are just 1 day away, recording this on Tuesday. Tomorrow night is the draft. There's a lot of questions and speculation around this draft in terms of what it's actually going to provide. I think there are going to be a number of key role players that can play rotational minutes in the NBA at the next level. Now, the issue is there isn't necessarily that same level of star power potential, and it makes for a very interesting conversation when you dive into ranking these draft prospects, because how much do you want to lean in terms of safety and knowing in what you're getting in a prospect, or are you looking for a high potential home run swing? So I took into consideration a bunch of those things and put together this list here. So at number 10, I have Tijan Salon. He has been a riser through the pre-draft process in the past couple weeks. From France, he is somebody that is kind of your typical, it seems like we have in the NBA, international prospect that has a lot of potential. We know the athleticism, the frame is absolutely there, 6'8" with a 7'1" wingspan, and it's going to be interesting to see whether or not he can put it all together, because he's shown really big flashes of defensive upside, especially playing help defense. Now, there are some shortcomings in terms of one-on-one defense, but we saw an improved three-point shot from him this past year, shooting 31.6, but he's really not somebody that you can build around necessarily as an offensive centerpiece just yet. The idea is about his upside, and that in years to come, he can be a two-way player. I think that somewhat reminds me a little bit maybe of a Denny Avdia of the Washington Wizards in terms of somebody who it's going to take some time to piece together all of the offensive fundamentals and the consistency on the defensive side of the ball, but is somebody who has all of the tools to possibly put it together. So I have him coming in at number 10. Number 9, I have Dalton Knecht, one of the most fun players to watch in college basketball this past year. He is an older prospect at 23 years old. Important to consider that, especially in this year's draft, where it doesn't seem like there are going to be a ton of, perennial all-stars available on the board, you might just want to take the known quantity, and I think that's what Dalton Knecht is. Now, there are some questions in terms of whether or not his offensive game is going to be able to translate at the next level, but we saw this past year in college, he is an elite scorer with top-end athleticism that I think he's going to find a role in the league. Now, again, do I expect him to be necessarily a number one option ever? No, but I definitely think that he's going to have years ahead of him. And also, the consistent improvement through him throughout his college career to get to the point where he finally makes the jump to a Power 5 conference and with Tennessee, and he immediately took over after years of being sort of this smaller school player, is somebody that I definitely have a lot of interest in and seeing where he ends up with. There are a number of teams sort of later towards the number 10-ish pick. I mean, like if the Memphis Grizzlies went to go get him, I know they already have a number of guards. Some people sort of built like him as well. I feel like Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart kind of tie into that as well, but it would be interesting to see. Also important to note with Knecht is that I thought his defense massively improved throughout the course of the year, so I don't think that is anything to be concerned about either. Number 8, I have Devin Carter, another older prospect in this year's draft, somebody who, again, has really risen up through the pre-draft process, and he is a veteran, spent some couple years with South Carolina before coming to Providence, and he is just the epitome of a dog. He kind of reminds me of Marcus Smart, who I just mentioned in the with the Grizzlies. I see him as being somebody who is really smart with the ball in his hands, is always willing to go to work, doesn't necessarily have elite size, but can still be a force of a human. I think he's really well built too, and there is some three-point shot upside. I don't know if he necessarily has, true starting point guard potential, but another player I think is going to be in the rotation for years to come on an NBA roster. Number 7, I have Rob Dillingham of Kentucky, a freshman one-and-done prospect with the Wildcats, and I think he has a really high ceiling as a scorer, where he has at times reminded me of maybe a Cam Thomas. Now, take that with what you will, because I do think that there are some tendencies with him that need to be ironed out a little bit in terms of shot selection and the ability to sort of move the ball around a little bit more. Dillingham came off the bench along with Reed Shepherd, another freshman phenom for Kentucky, and they sort of ran their own unit together, which was really successful. And again, when Dillingham is feeling himself from the field, he can make tough shots at pretty much any level on the floor. So I think that he absolutely, has the potential to be a scoring guard in the league, but there is some defensive discipline that needs to be worked out with him. Size is a little bit of an issue as well. But in the comment section, we have Eric Rodriguez asking that the Spurs have a chance to build around Victor Wembanyama and become a formidable team next season. Dillingham is somebody that I would definitely look at if I were the Spurs. The Spurs need ball handlers. They need somebody to be able to get it into the post for Victor Wembanyama, provide some spacing. I think that Rob Dillingham being selected with the number 8 pick could be a pretty interesting prospect there. And then additionally, if he can cut down on some of those reckless tendencies, he could be somebody that could, I mean, honestly, evolve into, I think that the high end with him is probably close to a Tyrese Maxey. Now, maybe that's just the Kentucky logo that sort of throws me off there, but I do see some similarities in their game. Maxey just maybe a little bit more refined. So I know that's a big ask talking about somebody who almost just made All-NBA, but I definitely... Dillingham is just a fun watch period. If you want to go and look at a prospect that has a fun highlight reel, Rob Dillingham is the way to go there. Number 6, I have Zachary Reese-Shea. Reese-Shea is a very interesting prospect here where... Again, I feel like I keep saying this here, and I probably something I just got to get over. You're not talking about elite high profiles here where I don't think that Reese-Shea is going to be, a player that you're going to build an offense around necessarily, but he has size, he has shooting, and he is pretty good in transition. Now, he's not necessarily a go-to creator necessarily. He doesn't love to create shots for himself on a regular basis, but is somebody that I feel like can sort of slide into a number of different organizations and be a really nice supplemental piece, possibly even a starter, provide a little bit of spacing from a bigger frame. So I do like what Reese-Shea can put out there. Now, again, when you're talking about somebody who is being thrown in the conversation of being the number 1 overall pick, I don't know if he's necessarily a building block like that just yet, but he is somebody who can absolutely be put into a system, I would say, and find a role for himself and provide just a presence that will make his teammates better. Number 5, I have Matas Buzelis. Spent this past year in the G League Ignite, was one of the top high school prospects when he graduated a couple years ago, and then had a little bit of a disappointing year with the Ignite in the Ignite's final season, which sort of is important to come into consideration here, between him and Ron Holland as well, who I do not have in my top 10, but both players who were, potentially seen as number 1 overall picks when they graduated high school and saw their stock dip after this past season. But Buzelis, the biggest question with him is whether or not he is going to be able to shoot consistently at the next level. In high school, he shot 43% on threes in his senior season, and then he was just 27% this past year with the Ignite in a situation where there wasn't really a primary creator, there wasn't very much spacing around him, so there were obviously issues with the team construction around him at the time then, but he seems to be confident that that was a little bit of a fluke and that it should be able to return for him. Stands at 6'8". He is at least viewing himself as a point forward. I think that's a fair label, but I do have some concerns with his decision making and whether or not he actually has a tight handle that is somebody that you can sort of have being a primary ball handler. I don't think he's going to be asked to in a year 1 situation, but at the same time, if you're buying into the Buzelis stock, you are probably thinking that he can be a little bit more of a hands-on guy, and that's going to be a big question for him as well. But I do think that the shooting is going to come around. That is the biggest question with him, though, for sure. Number 4, I have Donovan Clingan, the national champion with the Yukon Huskies in back-to-back years. He has been gaining a lot of interest in terms of being the number 1 overall pick, which is very much on the table. It's just a matter of what do you think that he is going to be able to translate to outside of being a paint protector and somebody who can score some points in a pick and roll situation. And I do think that that's what he's going to be for the most part. Now, we saw a more refined post-game offensively this past year in his sophomore season, and he seems to think that he will have an ability to space out the floor a little bit more as his career goes on. I don't necessarily have faith in that personally. I think maybe, it's hard to say because we've seen guys like Brook Lopez as well who spent years in the post eventually develop a 3-point shot, but I ultimately feel like Klingon is probably just going to is what he is, and that's going to be an impactful player that a number of younger teams could benefit from having right now. If you talk about a Grizzlies or a Thunder or something along those lines, the Pelicans even probably as well, just to name a few teams that could use some size, some paint protection behind their defense. Klingon does interest me there, and I think he's going to be a pro for a number of years, but the people I have ahead of him are where I sort of lean a little bit more into the ceiling, which brings me to number 3, Reed Sheppard. I feel like I'm higher on Sheppard than a lot of other people are. He is an elite shooter, shot 52.1% from 3 in college. He does a lot of that damage in catch and shoot opportunities. Like I mentioned, he came off the bench alongside Rob Dillingham during his freshman season at Kentucky, and he's another player that I think that he could land in a number of different spots and be really impactful and could make me excited about some young cores. The two that really come to mind for me are the Spurs and the Pistons. Either one of them, I think he would be a great fit. It's interesting with him because he has obviously been coming off the bench. He isn't asked to be the number 1 guard on his team, but he's a really good decision maker and passer, so he has sort of the baseline, at least intangibles, to be a guard at the next level. The issue is he doesn't really have the reps in terms of working in isolation or putting the ball on the ground, all too much, but he's somebody that I think can sort of start as a little bit of a Derek White type role. Now, size is definitely an issue. 6'1" as opposed to White, who is 6'3", 6'4". And with Sheppard as well, you talk about the fact that he was a very talented defender in college, and especially plays a little bit of that Steph Curry type defense where it's a lot of deflections and heads up off ball defense. But when he gets to the NBA, we've seen for a number of years now the way that the NBA, especially in the playoffs, is all about hunting mismatches, and there is definitely a chance with his size that he could be looked to get picked on there. But somebody who definitely stands out to me. I'm excited to see where he ends up on, especially with a couple teams in particular. Number 2, I have Stephon Castle. Castle is somebody who there's still a little bit of uncertainty in terms of what he's going to be at the next level. He wants to be more of a traditional point guard. His background would be a little bit more of a combo guard / wing, but you are getting a player who is going to be, one of the best in the league eventually, possibly, in terms of perimeter defense, the grit and grind that you get with him, the drive, the motor, the intensity, all of those sort of cliches is something that Dan Hurley has been sort of speaking on with Castle for basically the entirety of since he got there at UConn, where he was dealing with some injuries at the beginning of the year. He understood five-star recruit coming in here, but the goal is about something bigger. And I think that Castle is a winning basketball player. If he is able to get a consistent shot to go and sort of get more experience as a primary guy, where he was playing alongside Tristan Newton in college, who was phenomenal, I think the Castle could be a potential, building block guy on an NBA roster. And then the final name I have here at number 1 is Alex Sarr. He's, for the most part, the consensus number 1 draft prospect with a lot of NBA teams. Definitely raw and definitely has some bust potential in terms of what if he isn't able to fully round out his game. But I have him at number 1 because if there were ever to be a player that potentially makes a massive jump, I think that Alex Sarr is the leading contender in terms of that position. A 7-footer who seems to be confident in his ability to shoot from the perimeter. Now, consistency hasn't necessarily been there yet, but he is a good mid-range shooter, so the building blocks are already there. He has really nice intensity on the defensive side of the ball and is able to, for the most part, hold up on the perimeter as a big man, which when you talk about where the game is evolving, that's where I think a Reed Sheppard or an Alex Sarr are going to be able to find a role, because they're both things that teams are looking for currently. A big man who can hold his own on the perimeter and can potentially space is just about everything you're looking for. He does need to maybe bulk up a little bit more in terms of his post defense. Not sure if he will. I think that it's very, very possible that he sort of ends up in a similar developmental path as a Chet Holmgren. Now, Chet was much more refined coming into the league than Sarr was, and had more experience of being a little bit more of a, both 7-footers here, but that, point center, if you even want to call it, in terms of, having the decision making in his hands. So I'm not saying he's going to be Chet Holmgren, but just falling into a position where he's a little bit of a secondary big as he continues to round out his game. I think Sarr is a very interesting prospect here, and is probably one of the most volatile in terms of what people's perceptions on them are, but going to be really interesting to see how this all shakes out. Sarr, as things currently stand, one of the favorites to go first overall, but the fact that he has been dodging the Atlanta Hawks a little bit makes that an interesting conversation. But we will be sure to keep you all updated on that. But for now, we have to take our next break, and when we come back on the other side, I want to dive into the Toronto Raptors giving Scottie Barnes his max contract extension coming off of his rookie deal following a season in which he made his first All-Star game. So we're going to be diving into all of that. Stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we stick with some basketball here. We're going to be diving into the news that broke yesterday about the Toronto Raptors and Scottie Barnes agreeing to a contract extension. Barnes was the 4th overall pick for the Raptors in the 2021 draft, and he was coming up on eligibility for a contract extension, and the Raptors did not hesitate to go out and give Barnes their money, his money, I should say. 5-year deal worth $225 million baseline, plus a potential of him making up to $270 million with either an All-NBA appearance, an MVP, or a Defensive Player of the Year award. So a lot of money here coming for Barnes, and he is coming off of a career year where in 2023-24 he averaged a career high 19.9 points per game and had career highs in points, assists, rebounds, blocks, steals, and 3-point percentages. So he was able to continue building on, his career up to this point, won the Rookie of the Year award in the 2021-22 season. Last year, a lot of people were a little bit disappointed by him, and he makes the All-Star game for the first time in his career this past year. For whatever it's worth, it was as a replacement, but not to hold that against them, but just to put it in perspective. But he has been continuing to improve over the years here, and I think that this is a little bit of a no-brainer for the Raptors, who are trying to make sure that they have something to build around. They just sent off a number of their big pieces in OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam at the trade deadline last year, and have been very open about the fact that they have no interest in building around anybody in this upcoming draft. Scottie Barnes is the direction that they choose to go here, and I think it's the right decision. averaged 19.9 points per game, 6.1 assists per game, 8.2 rebounds per game. Like I mentioned, career highs in all of those categories, including adding a little bit of a three-point arsenal to his game, where he was able to shoot 34.1%, and he did so on, I believe, career high volume as well, where he took 4.9 three-pointers a game, and his previous career high was 30%. So seeing an uptick in that is something that is definitely a positive there. I wasn't necessarily huge on Scotty Barnes coming out of college, but I feel good about him headed into this part of his career, where not exactly sure necessarily what he is going to, amount to. I think that, like, in terms of comparing him to anybody else, he just kind of is this own being. He's one of these modern archetypes of, you want to be able to have bigger players that have the ability to be hands-on with the ball. He's 6'7", but with his wingspan, he looks even taller than that. And I think that, he is going to continue to be, I wouldn't say he's ever going to be a number one option on a championship team necessarily, but somebody who I think has a lot of versatility in his skill set, and he can provide impactful, meaningful basketball in a number of different ways. The fact that we have seen him really since he came out of college, there was some upside with his playmaking. That's only getting better as years come on. And part of the reason why I was worried about him coming into the NBA was the fact that, if you are if you're in this sort of middle ground size-wise and you can't shoot, what are you really going to be able to provide if teams are just going to leave you open the entirety of the game? That's not the case for Barnes anymore, where he has been able to refine his three-point shot to some degree. And, again, there's still a lot of unknowns for the Raptors, generally speaking here, of what their future looks like. And if you're the Raptors here, I don't really know what else you would be spending your money on. I recorded a short on this the other day, or yesterday I should say, and somebody in the comment section was saying it's too much money, wouldn't give him more than $30 million. But if you're the Raptors, I don't really know what you're saving this salary cap for, if you understand that, you're also the Toronto Raptors, and they won a championship in 2019, and Masai Ujiri, I do think, is a good general manager. So it's by no means a detriment on the organization, but you're not exactly a destination franchise here where you're going to be drawing in the top tiers of, NBA free agents that just sort of accept who you are, and you have to build internally a little bit. The Raptors decided to sell last season, and they are going into this new era where they feel like they can retool, and they have a number of, sort of interesting pieces around him, maybe with RJ Barrett and Ochai Agbaji and Emmanuel Quickley. The entirety of that group there taking Grady Dick in the lottery last year. But Barnes is probably the player you feel best about as having your centerpiece. And I see no reason why the Raptors would have or should have hesitated on giving him this type of money. The fact that they also got, when you talk about these types of contract negotiations between players coming off of rookie deals and organizations, they were able to keep it from a player option in the final season of Barnes's career, so they're going to have control of him for a number of years now. And again, I think it's just something to be excited about. Scotty Barnes, this was very easily his best year of his career, and still just after his third season too. I see no reason why the improvement can't continue to come for somebody who is just 22 years old, turning 23 next season. But it does make you think a little bit in terms of that 2021 draft and who else could be due for these rookie extensions soon enough. Cade Cunningham, Jalen Green, Evan Mobley, the three players that were selected before him in that draft. I would expect at least Cunningham to get the max contract. If you're the Pistons, I mean, what else do you have going for you? Again, now, for some of these teams, you just have to take into consideration what your current circumstances are, and if you have to overpay a little bit for a homegrown piece to continue to build around, I wouldn't hesitate to do so. Now, Jalen Green is a more interesting conversation in terms of if you want to give him everything, because there's a debate as to whether or not he is the best player on his team. You could maybe make the argument for a couple different players that could be better than him. Not saying definitively here, but a pretty overall talented Rockets team, I would say, where you have Fred VanVleet, Alperen Şengün, Jabari Smith Jr. These are all guys that you could make an argument for taking over Jalen Green. And Green went on that stretch after Şengün went down with an injury at the end of the season where Jalen Green was taking over. And who knows, maybe that will be enough to guarantee him this max contract. But I would have hesitations. I'm sure the Rockets are probably going to poke their heads into different trade conversations. We already heard before about the idea of them moving him for Mikal Bridges. That took place during the regular season. The Nets said no to that. But I mean, who knows with the Nets, what they're thinking behind closed doors. But Jalen Green is super interesting. Evan Mobley, I would say, is probably worthy of that max contract. Now, you're talking about an organization and a team that already has these 4 players. We've gone over it a number of times on the show, so I don't want to hammer it too hard right now. But you know that this roster probably isn't, fully complete the way that it's currently constructed, and giving out another massive contract could definitely handicap them. So interesting to see there. The other 2 names really out of this class would be Franz Wagner and Alperen Şengün. Wagner of the Magic. I'm not quite as high on him as a lot of experts are. In terms of the fact that his 3-point shot has seemed to just go invisible, and I don't know if he necessarily is going to be a perfect fit next to Paolo. Now, Franz, I would still give him the max deal, at least just to have as an asset moving forward here. I'm not as high on Franz necessarily, but I don't think he's ever going to be a negative asset. So if you go out and get him now, you could maybe move him down the stretch of years here if him and Paolo don't necessarily work as a duo. And then Şengün, like I just talked about with the Rockets, really interesting to see what they are going to do there. I would probably pay Şengün before I would pay Jalen Green, but I do also have a little bit of doubts with Şengün in terms of his play style seems to be he has to be a little bit of, I wouldn't say the primary ball handler because he is a big man, but the ball kind of needs to be in his hands for him to properly have an impact because he's such a good passer and that he does provide a little bit of a post-scoring threat, at least to some degree. And I don't know if he's good enough to be your best player either, though. So I think it's going to be, again, really interesting to see how they play this out. Would not be surprised if the Rockets choose to move on from either one of them. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. And let me know whether you agree with me that this was a little bit of a no-brainer for the Raptors to go out and pay Scottie Barnes this type of money. But we are going to be taking our final break here. And when we come back on the other side, we're going to be finishing off the show by talking about the Los Angeles Lakers and the latest updates surrounding them. They just introduced JJ Redick as their head coach, and there are some reports that have come out about their offseason approach. So we're going to be diving into that. Stick with us. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we head into our final segment of the day, where we're going to be touching on some different rumors surrounding the Los Angeles Lakers. Yesterday, they introduced JJ Redick officially as their next head coach. Had the press conference for him and everything. I only got to see bits and pieces of it, but definitely, in case anybody was curious and hasn't seen it, yes, he is officially moving on from podcasting, so we will no longer be getting the Mind the Game between him and LeBron James, which is expected for sure, but definitely was a good piece of content while it lasted. And also the fact that he said that he and LeBron James had not talked about the idea of him being the head coach until 30 minutes after he was offered the position, which I think that we can all agree is a load of BS to some degree, that they had to have had some conversations there. But at the same time, no big deal, obviously saying whatever for the media, but also the fact he was very aggressive in some moments of this press conference in terms of, the idea of facing the pressure and how is he going to handle that, all those lines. He dropped a couple F-bombs along the way there, so I wouldn't say contentious because he wasn't mad at anybody directly, but was definitely making a statement of being hard-nosed maybe. And I think it's going to be a really interesting era to see how this plays out. And again, I think that he very much can be a good head coach in the league, but this is a very difficult position to pick up, and especially if it's your first ever head coaching gig basically anywhere outside of youth basketball. So, going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But that being said, I feel like especially with JJ Redick now as the head coach in place, LeBron James is going to be their next top priority, is making sure that he comes back and he is happy to be back next season, where he is planning to decline his player option and at least enter free agency. Now, this was, for the most part, always expected. At one point during the middle of the season, Brian Windhorst of ESPN was talking about the fact that it's a $50 million contract for next year anyways, so a lot of good money there for him to pick up on. But at the same time, when you're LeBron James, I feel like, especially at this point in his career, he is probably going to, I think he's going to continue to play for at least another 3-4 years, but I would imagine he would like to get some money guaranteed for the next couple years and have a little bit more stability. He just can't necessarily, he could if he wanted to, and it would probably go well for him, but his old strategy when he was coming up in the league, or specifically once he was headed out of Cleveland for the first time, the fact that he would sign a lot of one-year deals, have a lot of player options involved to the point where he could hit the open market just about any time he would like to. I think that for him, at this point, age 39, that's not necessarily his top priority. It's just making sure that he gets guaranteed money for his family, moving forward here. And probably going to be a 3-year deal. It sounds like that is what he is interested in, and the Lakers are reportedly committed to making sure that they get him on this 3-year max contract. Ultimately, I don't think you can say that it's the wrong move for the Lakers by any means, in terms of the fact that it gives you a couple things. A chance at, being a playoff team and raises your floor a ton, and it gives you relevance, which is kind of what the Lakers thrive off of, especially after basically the entirety of the 2010s decade. Once Kobe Bryant tore his Achilles, it was pretty much over until LeBron came and signed with them at the end of the decade. So I think that that's a huge deal for them, is continuing to be a relevant team. Also, for whatever it's worth, the fact that the Celtics just won a finals and overpass them for the most championships ever in a franchise history. I'm sure they want to, make sure the Celtics don't entirely leave them in the dust to some degree. So they're going to be a team in the mix. And with LeBron James and Anthony Davis, there are going to be at least conversations about what different types of moves can the Lakers make to make them a finals contender. And my feelings on it, I've been clear about it. I think the ceiling is just about closed, or the window, I should say, is just about closed. Now, I do not like going out and like saying those types of things and completely discounting the possibility of it, but I think it's an extremely tall task for the Lakers to find a way into a winning situation here. And given the fact of outside of those top two players, they really don't have much to offer. Austin Reeves is a good player. I saw a report earlier that they could potentially be interested in shopping him for a massive price, which basically in my eyes means that, you know, the report exactly from The Athletic is that he's untouchable unless it's for a quote legit all-star, for whatever that means. I don't think that the Lakers are going to go after this third superstar type of approach. Now, that has been thrown out there a couple different times. Part of it is I'm not sure if there necessarily is another star like that that's going to be available. It's a shame. Just in general speaking here, I wish that DeMar DeRozan had that three-point shot a little bit more reliable. It's something that he's been working on for the majority of his career, but originally from California, I could totally see DeMar DeRozan in a Lakers jersey, and I want to see him on a meaningful basketball team this upcoming year. I think that he can provide some winning basketball. I just don't really know what the fit is for him anywhere, but the Lakers conversation is interesting because he's going to be a free agent. Lakers are probably going to have enough money to go get him if they wanted to, but probably not going to be the case. And I don't think that there is, you know, another star out there that is going to be what the Lakers need. Now, maybe, I don't even know if financially it works for them to go after Paul George as well. I would imagine that if LeBron signs this 3-year max extension, that it's going to significantly handicap them in terms of any other types of expensive moves they could make this summer. Probably better off going after some of, you know, the cheaper players out there. I don't have the list of free agents open on my computer right now, but I just think that this is a situation with the Lakers where if they are just willing to accept that they're probably going to be a bottom-seeded team and it's going to take a little bit of a stars aligning type playoff schedule for them to win it, you can be okay with that. But I don't see them topping any of the other best teams in the Western Conference. I think that the Timberwolves are going to continue to be better than them. The Nuggets are going to continue to be better than them. The Mavericks, we'll see, very much could be. The Thunder as well. You're going to have the Grizzlies coming back at some point who, you know, the Lakers beat in the postseason in 23, but I still think they're going to continue to get better as well. So all of these things put together, I don't think it's a very bright situation for the Lakers moving forward, and I'm sure that they're going to be, again, in that playoff conversation, but I don't think that there's a solution on the table for them. So let me know what you think about the Lakers and their plans this offseason. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content, and we will be back tomorrow afternoon at 2:00 p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.